are your thoughts from both an enterprise and as an individual perspective of how we should probably look at the DPI or the digital public infrastructure and how we should work towards it?
Yeah, so I think it's largely to probably blame the illiteracy which prevails as far as financial transactions are concerned. And I am sorry that I am sounding blunt, but if you look at what has happened, the bigger organizations were told to do it in a certain way, and they stuck to that guidelines and tried to make sure that the leakages are kept to minimum or they are hidden from any such attempts which probably can cause a data leakage or sharing of private information. But there were multiple other transactional modes where people very happily banded around their Aadhaar and the other authentication documents which they had. And unfortunately, it kind of spread maybe from both sides. From the consumer side, they thought that it's the easiest thing to carry or kind of show and prove that this is my identity, and the others, they kind of rode piggyback on that. And maybe earlier you could have probably asked for a driving license, but I find a lot of institutions now, shops, hotels, they would probably ask about Aadhaar. But the regulations which prevail in terms of protecting that privacy is unfortunately to a certain set of organizations, not to these people. And as a result, the compromise threat becomes very real. And what needs to be done is clearly, I mean, there is now a data protection regulation in place. You are supposed to be making sure that there are no leakages, and you kind of camouflage the data so that even if you kind of break some of the layers, you are not still able to get to that actual numbers and all. How far will it help? I am not too sure, because we have passed through a phase where we have seen this kind of proliferation of the authentication data being shared across many channels. And if you want to do, you will have to build something over and above that now, which I think is probably where the government will come in, because whatever leakage had to happen had probably happened in that sense. Yes, there is always a threat of hacking, there is always the other part which is still relevant. I am not saying that is not, and I think the bigger organizations have put in a lot of money in terms of making sure that the IT systems are well protected. If you go through the balance sheet of the large banks, you will find that most of the money that has been spent in the recent times have all been towards making sure that their IT systems are one, they have the capacity to kind of withstand such deluge of transactions, also that they are able to protect the sort of data which is there internally. But as I said, since it's kind of a open minefield, I am not sure whether just by preventing that you called enterprise. So, I do not know what is the definition of that enterprise. So, for bigger organizations, yes, definitely so, but it is not only limited to that. And you need to do something beyond to kind of now retrieve the situation and still keep these digital data and authentication which is available to be something which can be respected and protected.
I think wonderful. I think that, gives a lot of clarity in terms of how we look at as an individual. As you mentioned, when we go into a restaurant or a hotel, these days even checking into office buildings are asking for Aadhaar. So, sir, we talked about financial literacy, right, to a large extent, and the importance of financial literacy. I think one of the challenges that I foresee, and it's also very important that even for us people who are a part of this ecosystem, I see a lot of people not knowing what this fraud is. Everyone's looking at this word, right? But what is it? What does it mean in my daily life, right? When we hear the word mule account, I think where the struggle is also in terms of defining what a mule account is, right? So I would want to start with some simple basics, right? In layman's language for a consumer, right? What is a mule account, and when is the risk for me to know if my account has been compromised or not, right? Is there a way of knowing this?
So, mule accounts for the banker would be accounts which are used for as a conduit for funneling illicit money. So, from that angle it is very clear, it could be any account. But how does it become a mule account? That it is used for fraudulent purposes is something which I think happens two ways. One is where the person itself compromises knowingly, where there is a inducement. It could be anything. I mean, these days there are so many phishing techniques that you can write a book on that. So, it can be anything where they feel that they are going to get something by letting them use. And even we kind of try hard to kind of deny that later, that I didn't do all this, but somewhere you kind of parted with something which helped in terms of tagging that as a mule account later. The other is inactivity, where these are kind of very what do I say, done in a very structured manner, where they identify inactivity, they then kind of try their level best to break through the authentication layers, and then use collectively these accounts without the knowledge of the actual person, because he or she may not be in the picture at all. They might be someplace else, or maybe they have opened some other account somewhere and they have forgotten about this account, and somebody kind of cracks that authentication layer. Sometimes it could be even with the connivance of the bank people. It is not that I have not seen this happening, and then use that account as a mule account to funnel money. And this is very relevant in today's world, because the whole idea of fraud in the digital sense is to kind of scatter it as far as possible and then move it fast. If you want to do that, so that whoever is trying to kind of detect or prevent are not able to do so at that time period. And in that sense, they need this regular flow of mule accounts to do this funneling, and also across banks, across networks, so that they are able to move it quickly. And it is a very relevant threat. It is across the banks, it is a threat, and not just Indian banks in that sense, because the settlement goes through an Indian settlement system, but it is also cross border. I mean, what do you think the other guys are also trying to track in the more developed economies? They are trying to see where that money is coming from, and it can have a AML angle, but even if it is not, it could be just fraudulent proceeds.
And as a consumer, right, today what are the few basic things, as you mentioned there could be a book written on phishing, but what are the 3-4 things that you would advise every consumer, every individual out there to be very careful about so that they are not a victim of such mule accounts?
So, see, in good old days, it used to be somebody will come with a passbook and update that. And that's the way people used to track their money, whether it is whatever credits or debits that they have issued or checks they have issued, whether they have got transacted in that account, and what is the balance so that they can plan ahead. Then we move to somewhat a different form, which is largely kind of e-statements, where people used to receive that, and it became, what I can say, a bit faster, and in that sense you can track it faster as a consumer. Then we move to this third age now, which is largely internet banking and mobile banking, where you have the ability to instantly check, and there are lots of other things which the regulator has prescribed, like the SMSs which go in terms of transaction and all. So, in today's world, if you say that I was not aware, reflects very poorly. If that is not because of something we talked about, which is largely financial illiteracy, where you don't even acknowledge the ecosystem. You stay in a kind of a cocoon, and you don't even know that these abilities are there to kind of see what's happening. But coming back to the point, I think there are ways and means these days which lets you track very easily. So you must track, that's one. The second is, which we see constantly being hammered through all these kind of print media and TV media, where they tell you that do not part with your authentication layers. I mean, if you compromise and once it is broken, the only ability that you have is to go and close that account, freeze the card, replace whatever you want to do, because it doesn't belong to you anymore. They have broken it, means it will be cleaned in a hurry or used in some other manner. And we saw that happening, say 10 years back, more in cards, where people put up their most advanced ways of detection and prevention. And by the way, this entire thing of transaction monitoring or whatever we do now, the first sort of concept of that was used for cards, where if you go and do a transaction in, say, Thailand and try to go into a jewelry shop or somewhere else, you will receive a phone call that are you there and are you actually doing the transaction. So, the same thing applies here. I mean, now clearly that's the level that you need to reach, where you have to do it across so many transactions and so many settlement systems. But coming back to the point that you asked, mule accounts are there to stay, because there is a whole industry behind this. You said 20, 30 years of age. It's not one person, and there are towns, there are geographies where these are industries, and there are people who are constantly, I mean, they have a sales target. They keep on fishing till they get to their daily, so whatever that target may be, to siphon off that money, and that's a real threat.
I think very interesting points. So I'll come to the industry behind it, but before I go in there, one thing that I was thinking, right? You've been a banker yourself, and you've started from being a at the branch, right at that point where you're transacting with consumers. Today we have had so many employees, so many people who are joining the banking system, right, as relationship managers, as branch managers, as sales officers, and they have these targets. They have these targets to chase. They have these numbers to crack. What would be your suggestion or your word of advice to them? How can they ensure that they are, becoming the custodians of safety? How can they prevent mule accounts? Because at the end of the day, they are at the front line, right? How are they able to understand? Is there a mechanism for relationship manager, sales officer on the ground to report a fraud? Is there a mechanism for them to act on a fraud? Where are we today in the banking system today? What's it for the bankers more on the ground?
You are very right. I talked about some of the stuff that was there in the beginning, and in the beginning probably you had the luxury of time. So there was a kind of training, some sort of hand holding, there were support systems, there were familiarity with paper, and you had I would again come back to time, where you could sense and act. But as you move to today's world and these youngsters that you are talking about who are joining banking, unfortunately there is very little investment in terms of how to train and what to train, because the things are changing too fast. The ability to download it to say 80,000 staff or 1 lakh staff is almost impossible task. They do. I am not saying that they don't try to. They try to do a lot in terms of sending them WhatsAppable things and things which will help. But at the point of transaction, the luxury of time is no longer there. One, even face to face it is not there, because everybody is in a hurry. They don't want to wait. And the second is largely everything else is shifted to digital. So the only point that I will make here is that the banker's intuition, which used to prevail because you were taught in a certain manner, has to be replaced through the database support that you give to these people who are doing it. Right now it is done, but a large part of it is not real time. So when you generate triggers, when you do these processing of data or transactions or account details, you send alerts and triggers to the field staff saying that why don't you go and check. These could be transactions, random, this could be certain paper based, document based things where you had a doubt. So alerts can come through various scenarios that you have built in the system, and these guys are supposed to go and act on that, which means they have to leg it out, go meet the person, see the address, check and find out whether the shop is running or whatever they have declared as their kind of occupation. But as I said, this is largely reactive because it is not real time. The only way that this can improve is where I spoke earlier also, the fintechs and the banking industry, in case they are willing to innovate, is how can you do it on a massive scale on a real time basis and provide that database stability to that person who is sitting on the counter to take that instantaneous decision. And this is through a rigorous match of profile versus transaction. That is all that you used to do even earlier, but you had the time to do it. You knew the customer.
The turnaround time is
and you knew that suppose Rajit here is a salaried customer. He receives a salary and then he spends and then he waits for the next salary. Now suddenly he gets from somewhere a certain amount of money. I am as a banker supposed to ask, what have you done? Did you sell your house or your car or something? How did you get this money? Let us go and party types. So the bankers were familiar with a person. Here everything is remote. The clients are acquired remote, they transact remote. So it's very difficult that you will be able to catch something without the help of data.
I think that's a very interesting point. And if I just capture what you said, right? Previously, the RM or the relationship manager in the branch would know the customer, and that turnaround time was there to know, to understand, to see, and to also, this also creates a personalized banking. Today, somewhere I think as we talk about the one side of fraud, on the other side, there is also the quality of service, right? I mean, the reality is that I get a call from a certain bank, one of my RMs every Friday, every once in 2 months saying, I am your RM, right? And the reality is because there is a churn, there is a lack of understanding, right? So even as consumers, I feel, personalized banking is still, far-fetched. I mean, today there could be so much more that can be done, right? But the existing systems are probably, not there to give what you're saying in real time basis. Do you see this, do you see that there is a gap in terms of banking more from a consumer standpoint? And do you think that gap can be, you know, addressed better? What would be your thoughts in terms of where that gap today is and where it can really be worked on? Maybe two, three things that you feel are key there.
So, to start all these off, by the way, the first requirement is that do you know the customer? So, as I said, if it's a remote thing, the acquiring is remote and you have not seen the customer. So, the only way is to build a profile. Build a profile how? You source data. You source internal data, you source external data, and try to understand who this person is, whether he is a businessman, salaried customer, this, that. The first problem to that is that your existing core databases on which all banks work do not have the ability to create a profile. They have to be asked and developed, because the entire profiling to whatever was known as profiling was your name, your address, your phone number, at best your date of birth in case you are a minor and you are turning major and things like that. There was nothing else which was captured. So, sources of income, what kind of thing is all supposed to come from the transactional data, where they see how your account is being operated. That a person used to appreciate earlier, now they do not have that ability because the numbers have increased very substantially. So, first is your systems getting that profile building capability, and then there are these softwares which will sit on top of that, which will churn the data and throw a real time alert in terms of what you do. Yes, there are some scenarios which have got built, but remember, it's a race between what you are doing, whether you are doing it reactively, and there are others who are advancing this and doing some proactive measures in terms of how to crack that. So, you are constantly in competition with these guys, and that is where the biggest opportunity in terms of a fintech helping out a bank exists, in my sense. Like when you acquire more customers, which is the mantra in any case, and in a growing country like India, it will always be like that. There is no way that you will say, I won't grow, I won't acquire customers, I have enough types. It can probably happen some 20 years back in a public sector bank, but even they have changed and they press their people to go out and acquire. So, in this entire acquiring mode, the only way that you can do is the profile building is good and the models that you create thereafter are up to date in terms of not just being reactive to the scenarios of fraud which have happened in the past, but also to anticipate and find out what can happen in the future. Because when you interlink, what is the biggest problem for a bank? When you do it in-house, like I don't know, in a card sense we used to say closed user group. Why do we always experiment in a closed user group? Because we know things we can control, that this is the way it operates. There is no closed user group now, unfortunately. Everything is democratized, everything is interlinked. So, when you do something, you have to take care of that. You have to understand what are the settlement systems in the whole area of cards, the whole area of transactions. It is no longer that check, the poor check is dying, So, where do you go? I mean, you need to understand all these 100 rupee, 10 rupee transactions which is happening, and the velocity is so fast. You have to have scenarios built to tackle that velocity. It's not just volume, by the way. I have come across frauds in my lifetime where there is a short window of maybe 1 or 2 hours where somebody could crack that your reconciliation is not real time, and just things went through. They will hit you through all across the country.